everybody. Welcome back to another Monday, the best night of the week. And you know what that means? It's time for this week's episode of RfRx, your prescription for coping. I'm Kara, I'll be your host, and we have with us tonight returning co-host and his cat, Rob Palmer. Rob, how are you and your cat doing?
We are both fine today and glad to be here.
Well, we're glad you're both here and excited to hear from you and your cat. I'm sorry, I have for some reason had a brain fog happen and I have forgotten your cat's name.
Oh, that's okay. I mean, she doesn't have a Twitter account or one of those Instagram accounts that people do for their pets. Though I should do that. Some people make a lot of money from some reason for
Yes.
that. It's Peggy Sue, as in the song.
Peggy Sue. I knew it. Yes, I knew it was a two-word name and it left my
When
mind. Okay, so
when
it's
when we went to pick her up from the shelter, it was Panda Sue, and we didn't quite like that. So
I think you chose wisely. So could her Instagram account be like Peggy Sue the Skepticat?
I like it. I
That
like
could
it.
totally be a thing. And she could evaluate claims and like give like a, a
I like it.
satisfied meow if it's good and a like aggressive "Rah" if
She's
it's
got only one type of meow, and it's always aggressive. Because
okay. Well,
we
a lot
determined
of things
she
are
can't hear
BS.
herself. She can't hear herself because she's probably deaf. So she just
Oh,
screams all the time.
that's fair. That's fair. Sometimes I feel like that too. Okay, well, on
So how
that
are you
note,
today? How are you doing on this fine Monday?
I am doing well. I am glad to be here and glad to be back from my unplanned hiatus last week. And thank you so much for you and Helen and everyone else who filled in while I was having my flu-like symptoms, which may or may not have been brought on by someone laying on of
Was
hands
it
onto
personal
me.
curse, as I understand it, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I
it
may
was
have
prayers
received
which
a
backfired.
yes. I think some prayers backfired, or I got the flu. It could go either way.
One of those two.
One of those. But I am glad to be back and feeling much better this week and excited to get to hang out with everybody and to hear from our super cool returning guest speaker, who some of y'all may know.
Our guest is David Teachout. He's a mental health therapist and consultant, helping adults understand their mental journey of identity and interactions with others, where resilience meets mental flexibility. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attended a Bible college, and received a bachelor's in theology and psychology. And you can hear all about his deconstruction journey along with four other RFR volunteers, including myself, in a recent RFRX episode on our YouTube channel, Deconversion Story Hour with RFR volunteers. And during Bible college, David deconverted. That's an interesting time to do that. People say reading the Bible will make that happen sometimes. And he learned to appreciate and laugh at the frustrations of a shared humanity and how we create stories to provide meaning and purpose. He has a master's degree in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology, and is currently working on a doctorate in clinical psychology. For some people, 2 masters just isn't enough. Dave has been actively working within the field of psychology as a therapist, social worker, teacher, consultant, and subject matter expert for 20 years. In his spare time, I don't know how he has spare time, but he does. David enjoys reading a ridiculous amount of fiction and nonfiction, that is true, challenging himself through physical activities, maintaining a blog and a podcast. And Kara's going to put those in the chat, but it's humanitiesvalues.com, and his website is lifeweavings.com. Welcome again, David.
Thank you, Rob. And yeah, I think honestly I had in mind like the Tribulations of the Left Behind book series.
Ah,
Ooh.
How my head went there as an association with it, I have no idea. But I mean, I can make up a story, and it would be probably equally valid to any story we could
are
make
you
up.
familiar
So,
with that Deep Space Nine episode?
yes,
Yeah, so maybe
yes,
that
I
was in
think
the
it
back of your mind, Trials and
possibly.
Tribulations.
Yeah, I think it's actually one of only maybe 2 or 3 episodes of that series that I ever watched. So
Wow.
I
yeah,
mean, it's a good. You
yeah,
must be an original series fan. So
I original and Picard. Picard is actually is how I became a Trekkie. So
Oh,
The
okay.
next generation, you mean? You don't mean the current
next
Wisconsin.
generation,
Yeah.
yeah, I actually chalk up Next Generation as one of the influences for me leaving Christianity.
Whoa, we have to hear about that.
You know, it laid the
Interesting.
groundwork. Yeah, it laid the
How?
groundwork for humanism and inquiry in a way that I didn't quite realize until later. I was like, how did I get some of these like, interest in some of these questions and this like verbiage around appreciating humanity? And I absolutely always loved the Trials of Humanity episodes with Q and Picard.
Uh-huh.
They were
Wow.
my favorite episodes, and which is hilarious because at the time I should have hated them as a full on like to the right of Attila the Hun fundamentalist. But I just loved them. You just yeah, it was
Wow.
great.
So I guess like my friends and church members who were saying that watching Star Trek and going to college will make you an atheist were not wrong.
Well, they were not wrong. Yeah, you really want to undermine your Christianity, go to a Bible college.
Ooh.
It is fundamental to finding out that this is all just made up. It's
Yeah,
really
so
fascinating.
say more about that. I know that's not necessarily the topic of tonight's program, but you want to give us
It
a just a
it
short,
links.
yeah.
Honestly, it does. It links because, it's one of the things around that I was thinking about, okay, um, how do I kind of, soft sell this presentation today? Because when it comes to therapy and certain practices and emotional well-being, there's a lot of, quote unquote, triggers. Um, and a lot, beyond even finances, when we get to emotional well-being, as frankly, most of the people know who are attending this or involved in RFR for that matter, are well aware that those who style themselves as experts, those who style themselves as authority figures, are not always operating with, the mm, best outcomes in mind. They're very much interested in, of course, perpetuating the systems that they are operating out of because they want the world to continue operating the way that they think it should be. Um, and and there's a lot of connections between that and much of what I was going into in the last while. Um, this talk has been percolating for a couple of weeks at least now, due to some things I'll go into here in a bit. But yeah, I mean, it was just that initial questioning of going, okay, is what I think I know accurate, or am I missing something? Well, when it came to religion, I was missing a lot. And, and and I find myself often these days in a very similar spot when it concerns career, and the general field of psychotherapy, as a kind of like, what is going on that we've all bought into that isn't quite the way we think, and how much of the ideas that are perpetuated are based on assumptions that we all in intuitions that we all just kind of take for granted because, well, it helps us get along. We just don't question anything, which fundamentally is one of the reasons why I left Christianity. It was one of those things. Went down the path of that presuppositionalism of going, we have to have an epistemic principle. We have to have a specific ontology. And it was when I first started going, well, wait. In order to even read the so-called Bible, not that there's one version of that, but it requires that I assume that I know how to read, that I know that the words that I'm reading mean what I think it does, and that meaning is shared with other people, and that sharing is possible within then a collective reality that we're all part of and have access to a degree that is at least nominally accurate. all of that is assumed even by the so-called presuppositionalists of Christianity and so on. Like they're all just kind of like wink, wink. Let's just, hope nobody ever asks us about this. And, and as soon as I started asking, it was like, well, okay, wait, well, shit. Like now, what am I supposed to do? And, when it comes to certain topics within therapy as well, right now, the dissertation that I am struggling, admittedly, to get through the finish line.
That's
Is
the
on
purpose of a dissertation, in my opinion. It's to make you struggle. It's professional hazing.
Well, yeah, and yeah, talk about, and then you add in a whole bunch of otherwise professional malfeasance. So, and you've got a lot of issues there as well. But it's based on the assumptions that are built into a lot of psychotherapy concerning dualism, and how that feeds into a rather large industry-wide positive, assumption on the power of spirituality, religion, which is why there's such a high percentage of people who find themselves within connected with therapists who will push their religious ideas onto them, and have no repercussions for this, by the way. Like, you can't, this is not something that will cause anybody to lose their license. The predominant way for mental health therapists to lose their license is still one of two things: having sex with their clients,
I was going to guess that.
and insurance fraud. That's it. And everything else, you have to really, really screw up. And even then, and here's where we're about to go into, like, okay, what is therapy? Just to start this, it's going, and the reality is there is absolutely zero definition that concerns itself with the processes that go on and the content that goes on in the relationship. Zero. You look up the definitions of what is therapy to the ACA, the two APAs, because there's the American Psychological Association and the American Psychiatric Association. Very obnoxious. And all of them define therapy as essentially therapy is doing therapy. It's a complete solipsistic definition. So one, psychotherapy is a collaborative treatment based on the relationship between an individual and a psychologist. It's a collaborative treatment. So psychotherapy is therapy within a particular relationship. Oh, okay, that's clear as mud. That's awesome. Thank you very much. Another one, psychotherapy involves communication between patients and therapists, okay, that is intended to help people find relief from emotional distress, becoming less anxious, fearful, or depressed, seeking solutions to problems in their lives. Notice the fact, none of this is telling you what is going on. It's just telling you.
You could have just described what psychics and mediums do to people who visit them.
Right,
exactly. So the American
academics talk about how, like, we've come up with a definition of this thing that we do, and we've made it so broad and vague that it's technically not incorrect, but it's the only definition that satisfies everyone. It's so vague that it covers the entirety of everything.
Everything, yeah. And in fact, part of what I'm going to note is that is on purpose. The fact that these organizations that are set up to monitor what is evidence-based, so-called, and proper practice have almost nothing to do with actually doing that. Their sole purpose is to do one of two things: lobby for more money, and two, support the continuation of the industry. Period. That's it. That's really what they're interested in. And they will change, and have changed, their ethics codes to suit that. One example in particular, the ACA's original ethics codes prior to 2005, had an issue with dual relationships. So the idea that the therapist can engage in other relationships while engaged in therapy with their client. Well, see, that's really restrictive. And when you had this enlargement of school psychologists and therapists and counselors, when you had more and more people embedded, say in the military as well, which is where all this started, by the way, we can think actually, here's the irony of all the people who have a problem with the military industrial complex. If you like the ease in which you are able to find a therapist, think the DoD. Because it is exactly post-World War II that saw returning vets and the inauguration of federal funds being utilized for training up of psychologists and mental health counselors to deal with issues that General William Menninger had in mind of how to help people kind of deal with the issues of war. And once the spigots opened up, you just had this continual built-in incentivization to keep building out in order to, one, make sure that we got away from initially got away from a medical model, eventually kind of came back to it because mental health therapists started feeling a little sad that they didn't have the same same kind of prestige as medical doctors. And two, to continue expanding on pathologies. In fact, that's what's interesting around question 1 from the polls, and I'll reference these a little bit as we go on. We don't go through all of them, is that the answer to question 1 actually shows just how effective the marketing has been for this.
And let me read what the results were.
Yeah.
Hang on, for people that aren't seeing it.
Right,
yeah.
So the purpose of therapy was the question.
Yeah.
34 people responded. 16 said support, so the 47%. 16 said healing the past. Only 2, so 6%, said curing psychopathology. Understand what
that's the answer you were looking for.
Well, it's not actually even the answer I'm looking for. It's the answer that ostensibly therapy was set up to. I mean, you get diagnosed in order to facilitate insurance payouts if you're utilizing insurance, in order to then have a set of supposed distressing activities or behaviors that you seek to alleviate. That's how this was all, initially and still promoted in research as this is what we're doing. We're here to mitigate. But that is not how it actually works in practice.
As a co-host, I was not able. You can vote in the polls when you're host or co-host here. I would have voted for vetting because I hear a lot of stories from that's what their clients do.
I mean, well, so in fact, what's interesting here is that, so I mentioned that, this talk kind of got inspired. I mean, I've been having a lot of questions for a long time, but, I still am one of the few people that engages in Twitter because I refuse to call it X. And there's really, therapist Twitter is remarkable for the depth of its pretentious arrogance. Like, it is truly astonishing, and it's dominated by psychodynamic perspective, which is not surprising because psychodynamic is extraordinarily ego-driven.
What is a psychodynamic perspective?
So psychodynamic is a mode of and an ideal therapeutic modality concerned with, alleviating concerns that are thought to be based on early childhood experiences and through, the general accessing through talk and free association of, the unconscious. So fundamentally still based on Freud. Many of them will hate the fact that I would say that. It's like we've moved beyond the id, ego, and superego. And then when you actually read their literature, all they've done is just replaced the wording, but the definitions are almost identical. So nothing has really moved on from that. There's some offshoots. I'm actually a pretty big fan of Erich Fromm, who is considered kind of a neo-Freudian, more of a characterological analysis in sociology.
Okay, I'm going to
But
ask again, what is characterological analysis?
oh, sorry. So it's more about instead of deep-seated like instincts, it's instead character-driven or value-driven, to use a more modern terminology around it, for why we make decisions. So there's some really yeah, there's some very valid critiques, and every single one of those critiques still holds for all of modern psychodynamic theory. Again, they would very much tell me to, deal with my issues with my mother probably for characterizing it that way, but it's true. It just is.
So what I think I'm hearing you say is that there's a lot of ideas about therapy going around that
Mhm.
are believed by both therapists and clients that kind of run the gamut of approaches and ideas about what is even the purpose or the function of therapy, not to
Mhm.
mention the techniques that are going to be used. And some of
Right.
these may or may not be grounded in what we would call evidence.
Well, it's all evidence based. I mean, it's one of those things. Anytime I hear, this is evidence based, I cringe a little because when you really start taking a look at how research functions within, psychology and sociology in general, I mean, it's really, really sad. And in fact, I'll go through a few examples here in a bit. But just to wrap up a little bit on what is the nature of therapy. So, you know, again, this is about a relationship. So the term therapy, I'm actually going to point out that and offer a kind of definition that is, it's basically a label. It's a label for a relationship between a state licensed individual and their legally established patient. That's it. That's it. Because it doesn't have to necessarily, require insurance. It does if you're going to bill them, go through that process. But there's nothing to do. There's no determination of what actually occurs inside that relationship. There's no way of monitoring it. There's no the APA and the ACA have almost zero say in what does go on, and they have no definitive statements as to the efficacy of competing. In fact, and here's where things get fun, the efficacy of different modalities is determined as being almost identical, whether you're talking psychodynamic, CBT, or DBT. They're all pretty much the same numbers when it comes to their ability to, have positive outcomes. That's it. So,
Can I interject here? You
yes.
used evidence base, and Cara asked you about that.
Yeah.
So, evidence can be anything, right? My friend told me so. That's evidence, right?
Right.
And in
Which
order
it
to
is actually. It's anecdotal.
Right.
Yeah.
There's different levels of adequate evidence. So some
Mhm.
people have gotten away from wanting to use the term evidence, and there's an organization, I'm going to put the link in that, sciencebasedmedicine.org, which differentiates it from evidence-based medicine.
Yep. And thank you for that. Actually, I love that website in the organization. They do really good work. And there are, and this is where things like this, when I lie awake at night and wonder whether or not I actually want to complete my doctorate, it's things like this that I go, this is where I want to go with it. Jump through the hoops and go down that kind of path, because so much of what exists is just, I mean, listen, if the things work, work. If you think that you're getting helped by it, at the end of the day, unless you're coming up to me and going, hey, this really should be it and everybody should try it, as long as it's just like kept in the bailiwick of your own personal life, I honestly don't care a lot. Simply because it's not my life. Now, as soon as you step outside of your individual little space and say, I think this should be applied more generally, well, now we're going to have a conversation. Like now it's like, okay, because you've gone from, and Rob correctly pointing out, like the levels of evidence all the way up to, and again, that old, saying from Sagan around, extraordinary claims. And we need to keep that in mind as we go forward and consider some of the things that we engage in, just like most of us, if not all of us, did when we left religion. I mean,
Yeah.
part of the process of us leaving was to sit down enough and go, you know what? I sometimes feel good about this, but it's not good enough because I desire more than just getting along. I desire more than just feeling good about what I think about the world. I want to be questioned. I want to be, the skeptic movement is basically based on the idea of we are always wrong to some degree, even if it is only ignorance, as if there's only ignorance. But it's like, it's that notion of like, wow, we should really wallow in epistemic humility and go, I don't know. That maybe this notion that so many of us hold, say, concerning memory, as if it's some kind of, film reel, that we access it and get to roll tape in accessing what's going on in our histories, is in fact 100% wrong, even though we feel it in that way. And in fact, that's where it goes into, say, question 2 from the poll. So professional standards guarantee science legitimacy. I mean, at this point, if you've been to one of my things, anytime I use a guarantee or absolute term, you should know I'm tricking you. So
this is generally the case on multiple choice questions, folks.
that
Be
too.
suspicious.
Yes, always be suspicious about absolutist words being used in multiple choice. So, and several people really, they go, yeah, I know, like, this is a gotcha. And lastly, they should, and it sucks that they don't. So a full 40, say 50%, either knew it was a BS question, or that, wait a minute, it would be really nice if, the standards, and by that I include, say, educational bona fides and licensure, guarantees that what the person then does is at the highest levels of competence. Well, we know that's not true. I mean, we just know that. I mean, most people here, and even in this audience, will, on one hand, note that, well, the APA used to believe that homosexuality was a pathology, but here's the thing: in the almost next breath, after saying that, will then become really, really focused on whether or not the APA comes out in favor of, say, CPTSD or EMDR, and go, that's right, now they must be right. We should, be a little careful in this.
So are you basically saying, I'm noticing someone in the chat has said, okay, so is the conclusion that we shouldn't seek therapy? And I'm wondering, is that what you're saying, or
Nope.
are you pointing out some caveats here and some things to watch out for to kind of moderate our expectations and make sure we're getting what we intend to be getting.
Yep. And that's exactly it. So when we talk about, so if therapy then is the relationship, then it really becomes incumbent upon us to be wise stewards. I'm just going to quote the Bible all day. Of our resources, and concern ourselves with, okay, wait a minute, what am I going to engage in? What am I? We'll get to that question at the end. And so, in fact, here's one reason why I love the STP, so the Secular Therapy Project. For one, the STP, let's face it, is kind of tacitly based on the idea that professional standards don't guarantee legitimacy. I mean, we're recognizing that merely because a person has a licensure, that doesn't mean that they are going to practice the best form of therapy in the room. So, so we're already acknowledging, like, man, it would be really nice if we could, but it doesn't, because we're still human, and the practices that occurred, are what they are. But why does the STP work then? Which I think it totally does, and not just because I'm a part of it. But
And remind us again what the STP does, the Secular Therapy Project.
So the Secular Therapy Project is about basically addressing the concerns of secularists, essentially, who are seeking help concerning various issues, mental health issues in life, but have been either one, burned already by previous mental health therapists who utilize their own religious background to, pray out the gay. Literally, that happens in therapy.
I've had that happen. Not in therapy.
I know. So, or, ask for them to read the Bible or get right with Jesus or Muhammad or whatever. Literally, it's all
I
there.
cannot tell you how many times. So Dr. Wright told us originally this is why this was formed, because he heard that therapists do this. And I'm thinking, oh, they're not going to do that. I mean, my wife is secular. All the people she knows are secular. But apparently they're the minority, because so many people on the helpline tell me that is exactly what happened to them.
Some research indicates upwards of 40%.
Gee.
And in fact, it's even higher when you ask for the professionals whether or not it might be legitimate to bring it up. So it's likely happening more often than even, what's being reported on that.
Oh, that's so, yeah. There was a call the other day. He's not going to report it to anybody. It freaked him out, might have actually triggered his trauma, and doesn't want to get involved to report it to anybody. And that must happen a lot.
Yep. Yeah. And so the SCP seeks to have an extra layer of essentially screening that says you are not only licensed, and thank you, you've met that bar, and that is awesome. And we want to make sure that when you are practicing, you're doing so at the best standards that we can determine. That does not also then involve proselytization. Like that's what we're here for. Like, we want people to, if you show up to a therapist through the STP, you should be virtually guaranteed. Obviously, nothing is ever 100%. So, if at any time you ever get a referral through the STP and you find out that they are, peddling this of some, religious thing, by all means, let us know. We will take care of that. Not in a kind of like, swimming with the fishes kind of way, but just,
back behind
yeah. But we take, because here's the thing, we're taking pride in wanting to address a need. And by that, the SCP is essentially an extension of our own integrity. That's what it's for. That's what it is seeking to exhibit. And So we want it to function as best as we can because, frankly, I'll dare say, we have a little bit more integrity than, say, the ACA and the APA. Because we're actually a little bit more concerned with not just that you have the nice little letters after your name, we're concerned about what actually happens. So, and that's what carries us into this, continuing conversation, is going, okay, what is actually happening? And here's one of the first questions to start really looking at. Okay, so here's what the purpose of that relationship, whatever it may be, in whatever's going on with it, is largely to address two things. One, identify the problematic behavior that has brought you in and saying, well, I don't want to do this anymore. Or here's what's showing up in my reactions to it. I'm not really comfortable with how I'm reacting anymore. And two, to identify alternatives with you. Fundamentally, any and all modalities can be boiled down to those two basic behaviors principles. Like, you're coming in to go, all right, I don't like how I'm reacting, and I want to seek alternatives. How you go about figuring that out, there's where we get into some of the meat and potatoes, though, because here's where ideology comes in, philosophy comes in, here's where technique comes in, and this is where things get a little wonky when it comes to some of the research, because the extant research right now, again, like I mentioned earlier, basically says, well, it doesn't really matter what form you take, they're all equally valid. In my therapy, master's program, it was repeatedly ad nauseum that really the most important thing for therapy to function is the relationship, and two, the buy-in. So the buy-in of both the therapist in believing in the power of it, but also the buy-in of the patient in the power of it. So there is a lot of, let's just say, placebo going on here. Placebo is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, this is not, one of the jokes I make even with some patients is kind of like, you know what? I take supplements. I do. I try to look up PubMed and kind of see, there might be a little bit of research into this. Basically just to assuage my own, ego. Freely admit this. And so I've tried some things that are probably like, that's just stupid. And I'll be admitted in retrospect, like, yeah, that was dumb. And so, and yet at the same time, let's face it, we can do a number of things. And if we do X and we then feel better Y, yes, it might very well be a post hoc fallacy. Very much so. You know what? If it didn't do you any harm and you're okay with the expenditure,
You
okay.
use some Latin there. I think you might have to explain that for people who didn't come to my logical fallacy game.
It didn't come to your logical fallacy, which, by the way, everybody look up Rob's logical fallacy presentation.
No, they
Great
didn't. No,
episode.
that's one of the reasons you're leading me. They did not put that out on YouTube because they didn't think
What?
it was worthy.
The one where we played the trivia game didn't make it up, but
okay.
I know you've talked
Rob,
to us about logical fallacies previously, but
this needs to
whenever
happen
Rob
again.
has logical fallacy trivia, just know you have to attend that in person because it may not be on YouTube later because it's like a live game.
Yep.
So post hoc fallacy, David, is
basically the idea that the identified effect after a identified cause. I'm being very careful there on the languaging. Must therefore be because of that cause. It's basically any A to B. B is a result of A.
I said a prayer, and then my whatever acne got better. Therefore, the prayer fixed my acne.
Therefore, it helped. Yeah. And this is part of what feeds into the so-called efficacy of therapy as well. I mean, by some estimates, within the course of 6 months, even symptoms related to major depressive disorder will at upwards of 30 to 50% will remit. They'll go away without any other kind of without any therapy engagement. So
and I understand this is in all medicine kind of called regression to the mean. Is that the
regression
term?
to the mean. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. And so the so there's remission. There's social influence around what's going on. There's the entire problem around the diagnosing itself, which is a bit problematic, and that's a whole other presentation. But but fundamentally, in order to answer the one of the most recent questions around, is it realistic to expect any therapist, secular or otherwise, to leave their personal values at home when they go to work? No, it's really not. It's the key line here, and this is where things like the SP exist, and there are great therapists that are outside of that. By the way, there are, and but it's about asking questions like, what's your theory of change? For that matter, what do you concern? What's your theory of mind? Like, are we going to spend a lot of time, say, delving into and healing the past and the assumptions that come along with that? I mean, healing what again? The thing that no longer exists? How does that get perpetuated, especially when we consider that memory is a constant reconstruction? As most, from Elizabeth Loftus and others, basically the idea here is that there is not a single memory that we have that is perfect. It's not the purpose of what memory is. That wouldn't make any sense even from an evolutionary perspective. Evolution is not concerned with, copying in that way. It wants flexibility. That's how things mold and shape and deal with, changing realities. Our memories are a functional capacity of us to carry a sense of self-continuity, and in some ways may in fact even be like a a Dawkinian spandrel. They may not even exist as a thing that evolution served for. This is speculation, by the way, but is a offshoot of just how our brains were functioning otherwise. Like, we needed essentially a mechanism of being able to transmit data from one person to the other, one group to another, and memory just kind of grew up along the way as a kind of
So
offshoot of this.
one of my talks, which is, I believe, on our YouTube channel, I did Critical Thinking 101, and a good portion was talking about how bad our memory actually is and why that is. So if people are more interested in that topic, they can go look for that on the Recovering from Religion channel.
Yep.
Yeah, great
Yep.
point. But yeah, and David, so it sounds like um you were starting to tell us some questions that are important for people to think about when they're selecting
Mhm.
a therapist. And let's say like somebody isn't familiar with a lot of these concepts about like theory of mind and change, and they don't know the background and in the theory and everything. What should people be looking for? And does it matter depending on what the behavior is that they're wanting to change or what they're seeking therapy for? Like
Mhm. It
what are
totally
some of the
matters.
common things that people might be seeking therapy for, and what should they be asking when before they
Yep.
start down that path?
So I will start with something that Loftus herself actually noted when asked about the efficacy of therapeutic modalities and what to pay attention to when looking for a therapist. And she's like, avoid therapists who focus on symptom checklists. Because one, that's not how we live our lives. It's just not. Um, so we're not, we're not, life is not a check the box kind of thing, which, by the way, is a profound problem with the DSM, but that's a whole other thing. Because that essentially is a checkbox. Like, how do you know if you have X pathology? Well, you have to have one or two from symptom group 1, and then 3 to 4 from symptom group B or 2, and then suddenly you've passed the threshold and you have this thing. And it's just not really how we want to live that way, and often in many ways we like to have things happen for a reason. In fact, psychologists call this I forget the guy's name coined this phrase, but they call it basically effort after meaning. So we like to say it's like providing agency to things. We like to give things like that did this for me. It didn't do anything. It just existed. And even in our basic stories, I've actually covered this before in a different presentation around languaging. We'll talk about things colloquially of like, oh, that branch reached out and hit me. No, it really didn't. We're just kind of describing it that way. And we'll talk about our thoughts this way, in the sense of he hit me between the eyes with that, or she hit me between the eyes with that. Really? Like, I mean, that no, the thought didn't, because everything's happening in intracranially. Like nothing happened out here. We're not lobbying, as much as I love comic books and magic and fantasy stories, thoughts are not these like magic missiles from a D&D game being lobbed to from one another. We are mutually interpreting what is going on within the relational context that we find ourselves in. And so so it's a little difficult to go, okay, well, wait a minute. We want to give meaning, because when we have meaning, we can then, effort after, find direction. How many people have found themselves going, I just want to understand. I want to know why the person did fill in the blank. For that matter, how many times have you entered into even therapy for that question? Like, I just want you to help me understand why this person did.
Why my kids don't call me more often. Right.
Right. And so that's normal. It is totally fine. And yes, we'll get into the practicality. And so the question comes up of going, okay, well, if this is how we tend to do things, we tend to want to look for this meaning, we're adding agency to things. So one, identify the behavior you want to change before you enter the therapist's office or online. I do all my services online. So do it ahead of time, because you're the guiding principle here. The therapist does not, or should not, have an agenda other than supporting you in your own determination of meaning, purpose, how you want to, live your life. Outside of gross, like, ethical violations of, I want to find meaning by killing people. That's reportable, by the way. That's not what they're there for. This is where that line of the question earlier of like, is it normal for therapists to to be expected to be able to leave your values and worldview at home when you go to the office? No, but that doesn't mean that just because you can't leave them and separate them between your personal and work, doesn't mean that you then make the next step to proselytizing, whether it's not religious or otherwise. I mean, one of my opening statements to every new client or patient is, I am not here to be your guru. And further, if we are talking about the exact same thing 6 months or a year from now, I mean, I'll thank you for helping me pay my bills, but I'm going to ask you, what are you getting out of this? Because if we're doing the exact same conversation, then we're no longer seeking to address the change that you sought to do. Instead, we've turned into a kind of paid friendship,
This is
which, I
why I
mean,
wanted it. This is why I would have voted for venting, because I do hear that a lot. Because they have, my wife sees geriatric people. They got no friends anymore. They're all passed on or whatever, and there's nobody to vent to.
mm-hmm.
This comes up a
And
lot.
it does. And that's
She said, you know, yeah, I'm not helping you. Should we be ending this? No, no, no. I can't deal with that without you in my life. You know?
right. I mean, this, and the incentives are all wrong as well. I mean, one, we have an epidemic of loneliness. We have a, disruption of institutions that used to give, social structure for good and ill. And all of this is resulting in and then we have, especially in America, a grotesque level of partisanship and the ability to, basically say, if you don't agree with me 100% all the time, then you're there for fill in the blank, Hitler or fascist or snowflake or whatever, ridiculous epithet you want to use. And so what ends up happening? Well, we're still wanting intimacy. We still want a connection because we're mammals. We want it. So we're going to go after it. And sometimes it may very well be found in the broad notion of what therapy is. But understand that ahead of time. And that's why it's important to determine for yourself, be honest. What are you looking for? Because then you can tell the person, and then the actions will follow to meet and help you fulfill that goal. Now, obviously, goals can shift, so bring that up if it does. But be honest with yourself about what it is that you're seeking to do.
So
And
this is a good point I think you're making, because I think a lot of times when we throw around the term, like even if someone says, oh, I think you should seek out therapy, whether they're saying that to be ugly or, because they generally are giving you that recommendation, I think maybe sometimes we have the idea that, well, I'll go to the therapist and then they'll tell me what's wrong. But you're saying don't do that. They're
don't do
not.
that.
Okay, this is good information.
Yeah,
So once you have identified the thing that you want to change, how do you know whether the therapist that you're going to select has the tools to help you with that?
that's a that gets a little tricky. So one, you do pay attention to now. I'm a little wishy-washy on licensure. This is my own personal opinion. This is not necessarily reflective of the RfR or STP. So I'm going to throw that caveat out there. And the reason why I'm a little hazy on licensure is because licensure is almost entirely concerned with insurance. And so, for instance, in the way the models currently work, like I'm licensed in both the states of Washington and South Dakota. And if somebody, and based on telehealth, so doing, therapy, over, Zoom or other, over the internet, the only stipulation is that the client must reside in the state that I am licensed in. I can be in Zimbabwe. Like, it really doesn't matter. But the client has to be in there. Now, to me, what is the difference, to use Washington as an example, of a person who lives in Spokane and a person who lives an hour away in Coeur d'Alene? Suddenly they're in another state. It's an
I
hour.
have a worse example. My wife has clients, she's licensed in New Jersey. They go on vacation for a month or two in Florida, and she's not allowed to talk to them.
Right.
She cannot have a session with the same person whose
There,
actual
there
address is
is,
still in New Jersey because
yep,
they're not in the state she's licensed in now.
yeah. There is actually a little bit of a gray area there because if, so part of the ethics of telehealth and the training for it involves one, getting an address of where the person's at. It almost never happens, but this is best practice. And then two, there are caveats for vacations and even college. So like if you have a client who, is a teen or 20-something-year-old or whatever, and they happen to go off to college for a limited amount of time, it is possibly you have to consult the, state, boards about this. But you can actually still engage.
Yeah, my understanding from her is this is actually fairly new because of the pandemic. This has come up to
Yes,
make
this
these
all
changes.
passed in the last, couple of
Yeah,
years.
yeah,
This
yeah,
all
yeah.
changed. Yeah. So there's, so one of the questions coming up, if I knew how to get better, what I need, why would I need a therapist? Well, that's a good question. Why would you? You may not. You may not. That's just it. And by acknowledging that, you find yourself capable of going down different trajectories then of one, your own personal efficacy, your own personal empowerment, and then it might actually help you answer a follow-up question which was Kara's question around, well, how do I know who to talk to then when I have determined what I want to talk about? Well, then you look at what's your further training. Have that, the intake, the initial, assessment, which is often referred to as an intake, for therapy, is an interview. And it should be an interview as much about the therapist as it is about you. You should come with plenty of questions.
Like what? Give us a list.
Like,
I'm a list
what is
person.
here's a list person. So one, how do you view the nature of human relationships? Do you agree, given this crowd, do you agree with evolutionary theory as a way of looking at human nature? Do you, if you're stretching outside the STP, what do you think the role of religion is in therapy? That's a question.
And a big one, have you ever dealt with religious trauma syndrome? Do you even know
Have
what that
you
phrase
ever,
means?
have you ever dealt with this? Because again, now that I'm wanting to deal with the effects of, what I perceive as religious trauma. Well, shoot, yeah, you better ask. You should. And if the person goes, then thanks, appreciate it. I'm gonna go talk to somebody else. It is a little like dating. I mean,
Yeah.
there is a little bit of this. So much of these questions have to do with re-empowering the patient rather than giving everything over to the professional. Because yes, professionals exist for a reason. I'm so very much not a anti expert. At the same time, though, experts can't answer all the questions depending on what their expertise is. I'm not going to go to a auto mechanic to ask how to teach me how to swim, unless maybe I determined that they used to be a swim coach. I don't know. Like I'm not going to go to a plumber and go, hey, I need you to work on this electrical outlet.
Right,
Like
or even closer to the same field. And I have in fact told clients who've called to do that, to do just what you're
mhm.
talking about. My example is always like, if you have a Ferrari, you don't go to a Volvo dealer, right? They're both auto mechanics,
Right.
but there's special training in each of those kinds
There
of.
is. Yep. That's why, specialization exists. And it's, I mean, there are some questions and some deep concerns as to whether or not continuing education actually helps therapists get any better. But that's a whole other thing. Predominantly because continuing education is so really poor.
My wife had to take courses. I just happened to listen to one when the person was talking about tapping.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Continuing education course, you got to learn about tapping.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Tapping, which is what is
Rob.
this?
I think it's kind of like EMDR. Like it's saying that the senses on your body are going to make your mind change differently, something like that. I'm sure David could explain it better.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a little it actually the evidence for it is a little man. But again, it's one of those where in many ways I kind of look at it as a tactic for activating placebo. It's a real intent, because again, we come back to what are the two primary, determinations of therapeutic efficacy, and that's buy-in. It's the belief of the power of the belief in what this practice is going to do. And intent is a really big deal. In fact, we know this from much of our criticism of many religious practices. It doesn't mean that it's a bad thing in of itself. The question is not, oh my gosh, we should, utterly ignore the power of intent. Quite the contrary, in fact. Instead, we should be, oh, really need to be careful about the power of intent because this is going to lead me down paths that the brain doesn't really care about truth. It only cares about consistency and getting its perceived needs met. So we should be careful about these things. So ask. In fact, that's even another question you could ask the prospective therapist is going, what do you think is the most important quality in the therapeutic relationship? See what they say.
And how should we evaluate their answer?
A little bit of your own resonance. I would be careful if somebody says, you know what, in order to determine how best to move forward, here's a checklist that I need you to fill out in order to determine what's going on. Deeply prescribed therapy, or what's blanking on the term.
Rigid
But
thinking?
yeah, where things are very programmatic is a yellow flag. It's not necessarily a bad thing because they might be needing standards for the organization or something. But
what if you're a list person? Should you then be encouraged that you may really get along with this person who's going to give you checklists and surveys? And
you might at the same time, and here's another point to consider when considering entering into therapy is, am I, what am I looking to get out of this? Am I looking to validate, or am I looking to be challenged?
Ooh, okay.
Am I seeking understanding or skills? What are perhaps what's referred to as secondary gains? Like I'm coming here saying, I think I have this, whatever that is, but at the same time, I'm also just really looking for somebody to talk to. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But just be honest about that. Because if
Okay.
you aren't, a good therapist is going to point it out anyway. So, it's going to be there. So am I being challenged or simply supported? Be very wary if the therapist is just, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yep, yeah. Your mother really is a terrible person. Those friends, you should cut them off. Yep, that's, really? No, that's, it's not near, it feels good at times, but it's not actually helpful. So
Now there may be occasions where that's helpful, right? Or are you suggesting that it really isn't?
I will readily admit that there are times people show up and they describe a particular relationship they're in, or somebody in their life, and I'm very glad that they can't read my mind, because the judgment is flowing. I will totally own that. At the same time, part of this is about exhibiting the principles that I try to teach, and that is, I don't know enough. I just don't. I don't know what this other person's intent was or what they were doing. It doesn't mean I have to agree with their actions. That is not it at all. But if I'm going to encourage, which I try to do, flexibility in response to adversity, which I think it's otherwise referred to as resiliency, is I'm going to try my darndest anyway, to not encourage rigidity in thinking or judgments upon simple or limited data. I'm going to try really hard not to encourage that. It does not mean that it's about encouraging, well, you don't really know entirely why this person hit you. That doesn't mean you should stay with them. No, no, no. That is not that. We can hold a ignorance while also promoting safety. That is perfectly capable of happening and should be. And so the therapist who says, um, who cannot hold that line, doesn't mean they're bad at it. It's just, it's a question mark to come up and ask, how often is this happening? When was the last time, for that matter, that I left the therapist session going, I'm going to have to ponder that a little bit. That hit me between the eyes. You know, it's,
So that's a good point then. Like how can people tell if therapy is working well for them, if they should continue, if they should think about wrapping up? Like what should we be feeling like at the end of a therapy session or when we think about how it's going? And I'm sure that varies depending on what the reason is that you're going to it, but are there any
mhm,
kind of like green flags or red flags that we should be
yeah.
keeping in mind?
I would pay attention to, one of the feelings that I would say is a good indication is one where you feel um, supportively challenged, where it wasn't adversarial. Instead, it was um, friendly with a purpose.
Friendly with
Um,
a purpose. This
it
sounds like
used to
another
be
good like dating analogy we've got going
a
here.
little bit. It used to be referred to as, tough love, and that phrase got a real bad rap. But
Oh.
there's still, some legitimacy to it. I mean, sometimes, there's an older meme about, everything happens for a reason, and sometimes the reason is you made bad choices. Um, and, it's like, yeah, but again, that comes back to a principle of, is the therapist boiling everything down to a single or narrow perspective, a single reference point? Is everything, being boiled down to some, pet peeve that they have, or even with the best of intentions, a social justice point? It's not that that's not helpful, can be, but if everything is boiled down to a narrow perspective, then ultimately you're not being helped. You're being coddled. Life is tough. Relationships don't have to be.
Mm.
So, how we go about doing it is facilitating healthy relationships in all forms in a way that helps us step outside of and question what we think is so that may not be, i.e., to bring this full circle, how we got here in the first place. When we started questioning all the things that we were told, that hasn't stopped just because we left Jeebus behind. You know, or at least it shouldn't have stopped. It is a constant principle to operate under. And finding people, to address a little bit of a question earlier of like, well, what if I already know? Why should I engage in therapy? Well, because, like, say, an auto mechanic and being able to change the oil, for instance, can you do it? Probably. YouTube is great. But depending on the year your car was made, you might be able to do it with a little bit of dirt, grime, and some swearing. But the mechanic went to and has the education and experience that they might be able to see things from a different perspective and note other things that, what, I changed this and helped you out here. There's this other thing that you might want to check out. That's what the bona fides and education and so on of the therapist can. They have, and this is with all the caveats of concerns over how research functions and how little we actually know about the brain and so on and so forth. But ostensibly, they have made it a career out of questioning how it is to live. I mean, essentially, therapists in many ways are the substitute, hopefully better, of old school philosophers and priests.
Interesting.
They're the ones we go to ponder meaning and purpose. In fact, that's probably 90% of the questions that, get clients coming in for is, let's figure this out. What does this mean? Why am I struggling? How does all this stuff work? It's all of that. And there's
So there
nothing.
are a lot of good reasons that people might want to go to a therapist and benefits they can get from it. But it
Mhm.
sounds like the trick is to be clear at the outset what it is that you're going in for so that you know how to select someone who has the expertise in the kind of auto you want to have the oil changed on, to
Right.
use the analogy
Yeah.
badly.
Because do not forget your own, ability to address your own concerns. The therapist is hopefully well educated, experienced, can answer some good questions, has good, educational, information to provide. You should. At the end of the day, though, you're still the one that has to go home and live your own life, not them. An hour a week, if that's even what's happening, if you can afford that with insurance these days, you pretty much, they cover it. I mean, I'm old enough now to remember when insurance only covered 6 sessions and it was considered, oh my God, you got amazing insurance if you had got 10. Now it's pretty much just standard practice for 52. Like, here you go, 1 a week. It's just covered.
Nice. Now, okay, here's a question, and we have a whole bunch of questions for Q&A, so I want to go to that soon, but
Yes.
you piqued my interest here. What do we do if maybe we realize, hey, I was going to this therapist and I got what I needed out of it, but maybe I don't need any more out of it, or maybe I've listened to this episode and realized, maybe I'm going to the wrong therapist for what I want to accomplish. What's the way to break up with a therapist? Are there
With the
certain
breakup,
rules for
I love
this?
how we brought this all into a dating thing. um, is thank them for their time, and that's it. I mean, it's really, it's like thanking your mechanic, like, thanks for helping me out. That hopefully shortened the time that I otherwise would have, been able to do it on my own. Yeah, it's not me, it's you. And so, I mean, and really it kind of is. I mean, it's another one of my, often opening things, or within the first couple of sessions, is to note, like, one, if I say anything that it comes across as like, you don't agree, or doesn't make a lot of sense, by all means, push back. I'm not here for you to agree with me on everything. I don't agree with you myself all the time on everything I say. So, it's like, we should be into that kind of self-reflective practice, and you should be questioning, things a bit, because again, I'm not the one going home with you. One, that would be a huge ethical violation. But
Oh, I know
two,
about cases where that has happened.
yeah, yep. So, and in fact, yes, as just noted in the chat, if they're not professional about it, that is the therapist's problem. I mean, it is not incumbent upon you to address the incentive problems of how the field is set up. I mean, the incentives of the field is to perpetuate and therapy engagement. I mean, the number of therapists, I've gone round and around, is why I don't talk with them very often, who are prideful of, oh my gosh, I've totally got so many clients that have been with me for like 10 years. It's amazing. I'm really, like, I have been there, are you kidding me? Like, you're proud of this? No, that's I mean, we can call it therapy because, again, therapy is just the title for a relationship. But that's a codependency in a bad way. As far as I'm concerned, this is not a healthy, thing to seek to create. And yet, that is the incentive, from insurance saying, "Hey, show up every week," to, for that matter, some modalities are built on that. In fact, psychodynamic theory is based on the idea of one, possibly upwards of 3 sessions a week of 1 to 2
Wow.
hours each. I mean,
Ooh.
this is, yeah, it's why so many issues, with it. But
I am noticing that we have a growing list of questions that people want to ask you, and I want to have time to do that. I think some of them will have to go over into the Hangout. We have a lot, but are you ready to wrap up and move towards Q&A? Do you have any closing thoughts you want to leave us with, or should we just jump right in?
I'll reiterate that one of the points I made, a few minutes ago, and that is never forget that you're the one that has to go back and live your own life.
I like that. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, that is going to be tonight's quote of the evening. You were the one that has to live your own life. I like it.
If we're still
Okay.
making the TikTok outtakes, we can just make that one right there.
Ooh, I like it. Video editors, pull this clip. Okay, excellent. Well, I think that's a great note to transition on into Q&A. Let me go ahead and drop for everyone your links into the chat. Yes, let's add a TikTok dance to that. We need an RfRx TikTok dance. Please give us ideas and recommendations, folks. Help us out here. Bear in mind that I am tone deaf and I'm highly uncoordinated, but help us please. Rob may be able to do better.
I would suggest our head troll stomper
Yes, yes.
once she's feeling better.
Please help us, Glenda. I love it. Okay, well, now bearing all of that in mind as we ponder our TikTok dance of the future, let's get into some Q&A. We have a whole bunch. We'll get through as many as we can. And so let's see. A question that someone has asked, David, is what is the most popular therapeutic approach currently making the rounds in the therapist community?
CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Talking ball
That's
torture.
it. Yeah.
Wait, what?
But I mean, it might be just as effective, frankly. So it's depending on the issue. No, I mean CBT, which I affectionately refer to as logic skills masquerading as therapy. It is this so this is where we get into a little bit of like, how do we determine efficacy? And this kind of research really just it gets on my last nerve, because there's a lot of bait and switching going on and just outright lying, because the actual effect will often be referred to or be noted as being like, so a low effect, statistically speaking, is around a 0.2, 0.3. Medium size effect is around 0.5. And then high effect is more around 0.7 or so. And now, quite often, depending on the nature of what's going on, placebo, and which is why we want to compare it to a control group, placebo itself will sometimes be upwards of 0.3 or higher, which is amazing. And yes, talking about R values, and trying to keep the nomenclature down. And what ends up happening is quite often and I have several articles up that if you only read the intro to a paper and the conclusion, they will say, yep, highly effective, 0.7, 0.8, whatever it is. Here's the thing, you look at and start controlling for, and some of the papers will actually do this in the middle, the things that gets boring and people skip over. I literally had a doctoral advisor tell me that really research, you just have to read the intro and the conclusion. Oh my God. But the middle part will often then say, okay, well, we need to, check on publishing bias. We have to consider, comorbidities. We need to consider, what was the efficacy of the control group or so on, which is often in previous research in determining therapeutic efficacy was just the waiting group. So this idea was you'd have two groups, one got the therapy, and two, there was the waiting group who was told you're going to get it, but they end up never getting it. A little cruel. They don't do that as often anymore.
Seems
But here's the
unethical
thing.
that they don't ever get anything.
Not at the moment. It's just for the purposes of this time frame.
Oh,
And so yes, indeed, the efficacy of the therapy group maybe might be 0.7. But then when you start dealing with publication bias and population and controls and so on, it goes down almost every single time to about a 0.4 or 0.5. Then when you consider the control group, they will then have it at being upwards sometimes of 0.3 or 0.4. So really the efficacy of these things actually ends up being about 0.1 or 0.2, which is not much. But they will report a 0.7.
so what
So
does that mean for people that want therapy? Are you saying it won't work?
it's more that what does work is going to be, and here we come back to the power of your buy-in and the nature of the relationship integrity that you've developed with the professional. I mean, this goes to fundamentally, how many people here can think about that one teacher that just said the thing and supported them, and they can look back and go, "Wow, I got that was the inspiration," or
Oh,
the the relative who just happened to bring you to the side and support you in a moment of hurt when nobody else was. That's
okay.
what
So
we're really looking at here, is the power of human connection.
Hmm.
And so when we start looking at it's our value of dog therapy, I don't know, I'll have to look that one up. Probably pretty decent. um, but is that that's really what we're going after here.
This is one of the reasons I hear when people ask, well, if medical science says that so-and-so therapy doesn't, I'm not talking about psychotherapy, actual physical therapy of some sort. Well, not physical therapy, for physical problems, therapy for physical problems, right? Medical solutions for physical problems. Why does this one work when you guys are saying it's just pseudoscience and doesn't make any sense? Well, because those practitioners will spend an hour with you, put you in a room with nice smelling candles on a table, right? And an actual medical doctor say, yeah, do I know you? Okay, take this pill, goodbye. That's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, and that's in fact, when I was in my initial therapy program, that was one of the first questions that really started all of this. A couple of decades ago now, is raising the question like, wait a minute, if the power of the outcomes is largely contingent on the buy-in and the nature of the relationship, then shouldn't we be asking and doing more research on just what the hell that is?
Right.
Like, of just what is that
I
power? What
had a
is going on in
friend
that?
who graduated with an acupuncture degree and went on to become an acupuncturist. And I was at the graduation ceremony. And I'll bet this never happens in medical school. A large part of it was people coming up to the microphone in a line that they prepared in advance,
Mhm.
giving praises for the help that person gave them while they were still in training.
Yeah.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing, David, is that it may be less important to figure out like what's the exact percentage of times that this particular type of therapy is effective for people, and more important to ask the questions at the beginning when you're looking for a therapist to see if you're aligned in what your
Mhm.
goals are and whether what they're saying sounds like it resonates with you. And it may be that for some people they are going to respond better to certain kinds of therapy just because that makes more sense to them. whereas somebody else with the exact same problem might come in and have a better time with, or worse time with, that therapist based on how they feel about them as a person and how they relate to the approach that's being taken.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
This is, you know, one of the follow questions for each person is that, every interaction, every intervention rather, that we engage with has consequences. Good, bad, indifferent. We hope the good outweighs the rest of it. But in not all therapies, practices are built equal in the sense of how they may incur certain responses in people. Because part of it's going to depend on the nature of what the person's bringing in. So just because I'm a bit of a masochist, the question comes up around EMDR. It is a disturbing fact that for the those concerning the belief in recovered memories, which is not a thing, by the way, that upwards by one study, 93% of EMDR practitioners believe in recovered memories. That to me, on top of all the rest of the issues that I have with it, is a cause for concern. But it depends on what you're there for a little bit. I mean, I'm going to try to, I would make a case in a person-to-person conversation of, being very wary of a practice that tends to invoke that kind of false idea, and wonder, can you get just as good or help without necessarily, doing it this route? I would say yes, you can. Since fundamentally EMDR is basically exposure therapy with a gimmick. So can you engage, with, exposure and deal with, traumatic experience in ways that are other than that? Yeah, I think you can. So, it's but it's a question for yourself. Again, you're the one who has to go home. Yeah, we can have a kind, if you really want to know more and ask more questions, by all means, we can have that conversation. But at the end of the day, whether or not you agree with me or anybody else for that matter, you're still the one that has to live with what intervention did you agree with and what are the consequences of it.
Okay. Well, we are getting low on time, but I want to try to get to one or two other questions if we can do like rapid fire answer. And then we're gonna have to get to the other 15 of these in the hangout, y'all. But Rob, do you have a burning
Yeah, I have a good one.
question?
Hopefully this could be just a quick answer. We'll see.
Mhm.
David, what is the kookiest, which was the word used, psychotherapy treatment you've ever heard of?
Oh, there's so many. I love, personally, there are two that actually take the prize. One is primal scream therapy. This was big, I think, back in the 70s, 80s, if I remember right. I could be very wrong about that, so
You
by all
just got
means,
into
correct
a
me.
group with a bunch of people and started screaming.
Yeah, pretty. I mean, really, it's really like,
Yeah.
it was to say that you went into this office and you just belted out as a kind of, it was basically catharsis. The other one, which ended up being, largely banned because it resulted in death, was rebirthing.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, where you would swaddle somebody
Attachment?
as tightly as
Attachment?
possible. It
Attachment
was
in the
based on
word?
attachment theory,
Yeah.
and various versions of psychodynamic
Hmm.
theory. And it was all the rage until somebody died. And then it was like, oh, maybe, this could be a problem.
Okay.
So
So I don't know if that's what they were looking for as defined by kooky, but okay. Let's go on to the
I mean, yeah. I mean, kooky, that's easy because you can just go down, woo-woo paths. But what I love about those examples though is that they were full on promoted by
Yeah.
experts in the field. So, yeah.
All right, Kara.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's exciting. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Let's see if we have time for one other question and then we will wrap up. So, oh, here's one. Someone was wondering, what do you think of life coaches and how does that differ from therapy and when might someone seek one or the other?
You know, so one of the questions asked is, what are your resources? You know, if you don't have the financial resources to step outside of insurance, then don't. You know, stick with insurance and follow up with questions. In fact, there was a great one that just got posted around, you know, there was a worry that some of this, you know, paralysis by analysis, like, oh my gosh, if I have to ask a bunch of questions, I'm not going to reach out. Fair, and it's it's a good point. And so, you know, the response then, you vibe with them, offer something vulnerable, and feel how they respond, and they seem to have a theory of mind that comports to reality. Great beginning. I love it. Truly. You know, obviously I'm going to go more complicated, but that's me. But that's a really good beginning. So when it comes to coaching, there you have it. I mean, it is right there. If you have the resources to, you know, the questions don't really change to them. There are some great coaches. I hate that word. But you know, but there are many of them exist out there. Many of them tend to be a little more focused on outcomes. So, you know, many are not in the business of, let's see how long I can, you know, milk this. Many are though, so do your diligence in asking. But it's simply not the case that, you know, just blanketly, like if you're a coach, you're therefore incompetent. Especially not anymore these days. There are so many people who, you know, professionals who have left the, you know, therapy paradigm industry and gone and kind of put up a coach shingle kind of thing for various reasons that I may or may not agree with fully. Shoot, I offer it. I mean, just all honesty. I mean, I have clients in other countries where, you know, we have conversations around things. Logistics of that get a little interesting, but you know, you can do it. But again, it depends on what are you looking to address? What are their, you know, what are their methods of doing so? How do they consider, you know, how do they consider the identification of success? Are they there to empower themselves or you?
Okay, good to know. Good to know. Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit about volunteering?
I can do that. So